Hello, Linda. Ken's funeral is about to start. You're not seriously planning on skipping it, are you? Excuse me. What are you talking about? I asked, confused. Ken has passed away. You received a call from Marissa yesterday, right? I felt a wave of confusion. I hadn't been in touch with my mother-in-law for years, so this sudden request seemed strange. Moreover, I thought Ken had passed away a year ago. Yet here I was, unsure of what was going on. Get ready. I'm coming to pick you up, my mother-in-law said firmly. Despite my confusion, I got dressed in morning clothes just in case. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang persistently. We need to go. It's unacceptable not to attend the funeral of a former husband, even if you're divorced, she insisted. Funeral? You mean the first anniversary, right? I asked, still trying to make sense of the situation. My mother-in-law frowned deeply. No, the actual funeral is starting now. Why would it be the anniversary? I was perplexed. A year ago, Marissa, Ken's current wife, had informed me of his passing. She had chosen not to invite me to the funeral, but I had sent $200 as a condolence offering. When I mentioned this, my mother-in-law clicked her tongue and furrowed her brows even more deeply. Just get in the car. Where's Alex? I'm not bringing Alex. I don't want him to see Marissa, I replied. Without another word, my mother-in-law ushered me into the passenger seat and drove us straight to the funeral home. I was left in a state of bewilderment, being drawn into an unexpected situation. I'm Linda, 35 years old, a single mother to a 3-year-old, living with my parents. My job at a local real estate management company supports us. Despite the challenges, I find fulfillment in the lively atmosphere of my parents' home. 3 years ago, when my husband unexpectedly demanded a divorce, it felt like my world was falling apart. Abandoned with a newborn, I was fortunate to have moved in with my parents right after the hospital discharge, and I've been rebuilding my life ever since. I met my ex-husband through my aunt, who had a knack for matchmaking. Linda, there's someone wonderful I think you should meet, she had said without preamble. My aunt, known among her patrons as the matchmaking aunt, had successfully paired off several couples. There's a relative of one of our regular customers, she continued. He's over 35 and still single. He's good-looking, has a great personality, and works for a major company. I think you two would get along well. Although I wasn't actively seeking a relationship, I agreed to meet him out of respect for my aunt. At the hotel lounge where we were set to meet, my future husband was already there waiting. True to my aunt's description, he was a handsome man in a well-fitted suit, with a refreshing smile. After exchanging greetings, he looked at me seriously and asked, "Do you seriously consider marriage, Linda?" I wasn't entirely sure how to respond to his question. I decided to be honest. I'm not opposed to the idea of marriage, but to be truthful, I came today just to honor my aunt's request. My husband let out a relieved sigh. That's good. I'm 3 years older than you, and I wasn't in a rush to get married either. Like you, I came here out of respect for a relative's wishes. With the pressure of matchmaking off our shoulders, we both relaxed. Conversation flowed naturally between us, and it felt like a good sign. It's funny how fate works. Two people who had no initial intention of marrying ended up tying the knot within a year. From the start of our marriage, my husband's work kept him incredibly busy, often leading him to come home late at night. I hadn't expected a honeymoon phase, but it was lonely starting our life together with him rarely around. I'm sorry things are like this, even though we're newlyweds, he said. I know this is a critical time for me to work hard, so I hope you can bear with it. I'll let you know on the days I can come home, so don't worry about preparing meals for me. I nodded, understanding his situation. I get it. Just don't overdo it, okay? As time went on, the loneliness I initially felt during the weekdays became routine. After just a month, I adjusted to not having to rush home from work to prepare dinner. My husband made an effort to be home on weekends, valuing our time together by going out or dining with me. Our relationship with my in-laws remained almost non-existent. They were indifferent and rarely interfered, which in a way, made our marriage start off smoothly. Nearly a year into our marriage, I discovered I was pregnant. I'm happy, my husband said, but his demeanor grew more distant as the days passed. As my pregnancy progressed, he began spending weekends away from home more frequently, leaving me alone. The severe morning sickness and having to quit my job were significant challenges. Hey, let's go look at baby stuff soon. We need to start getting ready, I suggested. Oh, I've got something planned this weekend. You go ahead and pick out whatever you like. Perhaps it was the hormonal changes making me more emotional, but every time he said things like that, I felt a wave of sadness. This is your child too. Let's think about this together. I'm busy. It's your child too, so you should prepare yourself. You have time during the day, so just go by yourself. Every time, his response left me feeling more isolated. I tried to discuss our child with my husband, but he only grew more irritable and raised his voice. Despite recognizing the growing distance between us, I felt powerless to change the situation. I still clung to the hope that the arrival of our child would bring about a positive shift in him. When labor began, my husband was nowhere to be found. Despite numerous attempts to reach him, my calls and messages went unanswered. I ended up calling my mother and took a taxi to the hospital, where I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. After the delivery, I contacted my husband again. His response was dismissive. Well done. It's pointless for me to be there now, isn't it? Let me know when you're being discharged, and I'll come to pick you up. Though his response was far from reassuring, it offered me a sliver of relief. During my hospital stay, both my parents and my in-laws visited, taking turns to hold the baby and remarking on how cute he was. Even my usually indifferent in-laws seemed genuinely pleased. Despite the surrounding joy, the one person I most wanted to share this moment with, my husband, was absent. He never visited the hospital, leaving me unable to express my feelings or seek support from anyone. On the day of my discharge, my husband came to pick me up from the hospital room. As soon as he entered, I handed him our sleeping son without saying a word. For a moment he looked surprised, but then stood silently, gazing at the baby. "The name's Alex, right?" he asked. I was taken aback that he had thought of a name for our son. I thought it was a good choice and felt a flicker of hope that everything would be all right. I imagined a future filled with joy and family happiness. However, my optimism was short-lived. Upon returning home for the first time in a week, I discovered a pair of unfamiliar high heels with ribbons at the entrance. Entering the living room, I found a young woman in a short dress, her presence a stark reminder of the cracks in our relationship. "I want a divorce," my husband declared abruptly, thrusting divorce papers in front of me. "I've realized I don't want children after all." I was stunned. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "The child is already born, and why bring me all the way here if you wanted a divorce?" "It can't be helped," he replied with a smirk. "Marissa wanted to meet you and apologize." I felt a wave of dizziness as his words sank in. I had envisioned building a family and creating a home for the sake of my career, but when faced with the reality of pregnancy, I felt overwhelmed. "What are you talking about?" I asked, bewildered. "So you're saying the marriage was just for your career?" "Exactly," he said dismissively. "You were always so compliant, convenient, not just for companionship, but also for handling household chores while I continued to enjoy myself." I stared at him in disbelief. "I can't believe this. You were spending your nights with other women. I thought we had a happy marriage." "Well, being married does have social benefits, so I've decided to remarry. This is my new partner," he said, pulling the woman closer by the shoulder. "She agrees with me on not wanting kids, and frankly, she's prettier than you." The woman stood there with a smug expression, clearly relishing my shock. "I'll pay you alimony and child support at the standard rate. Just send me the bill or whatever." "I'm really sorry it's come to this, ma'am," the woman said insincerely, her tone lacking any genuine remorse. It was clear she enjoyed watching my reaction, and I was left alone in the face of this unsettling situation. I refused to let myself cry, despite the sadness of my baby being born into such a situation. Infuriated by the woman's pitying gaze directed at my son, I grabbed the divorce papers from my husband's hand. "I'll handle the filing myself," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of misery and resolve. I was desperate to leave that place as quickly as possible. "I'll send your things to your parents' house later," he said dismissively. "Thanks for everything until now. Goodbye and good luck being a single mom. Every word from the woman stung, and I fought the urge to lash out. Instead, I silently turned and walked toward the entrance. The cardboard boxes stacked next to the doorway were likely my belongings, all set to remove me from the apartment. Holding my baby tightly, I choked down my frustration and walked out of the apartment, leaving behind a place that had once felt like home. By the time I reached my parents' house, my initial fury had given way to deep dejection. My face was blank as I began to recount what had happened. My parents were livid on my behalf. That idiot, my father roared, his face flushed with anger. He was ready to confront my husband, but my mother and I managed to hold him back. My father's rage seemed so intense that merely hitting someone wouldn't have been enough to satisfy him. As I tried to calm him down, tears began to flow freely from me. Overwhelmed by frustration, sadness, anger, and despair, I found myself crying uncontrollably, like a child. It was only when my parents wrapped their arms around me and cried alongside me that I started to regain my composure. I decided to inform my in-laws of the divorce over the phone. It was painful, especially since they had been so thrilled about their grandchild's birth just days earlier. "If that's what you two have decided, I won't interfere," my mother-in-law said, her voice tinged with regret. "It's a shame about the grandchild. I'm sorry for what Ken did to you." However, she didn't suggest trying to mend the marriage. It seemed that their concern for their son's marriage and affairs was minimal. Afterward, through a lawyer, I filed for alimony and child support. The divorce was finalized without issue. My husband transferred the alimony in a lump sum, likely wanting to settle everything quickly to move on with his new relationship. We agreed on a monthly child support payment of $800 with no request for visitation rights. Realizing he truly had no interest in our child, I felt a clear sense of closure. Thus, our marriage ended abruptly after just 2 years. I moved back to my parents' house with my son Alex and resumed working as an office worker at a nearby real estate management company, thanks to a referral from my father's acquaintance. According to my aunt, my ex-husband and his affair partner had remarried almost immediately after our divorce was finalized. I had chosen the name Alex for our son because at the hospital, it felt like the one genuine sentiment my ex-husband had expressed. I hoped for a bright future for my child and wanted him to know he was loved, even if he never saw his father again. A year after the divorce, when I had nearly forgotten about him, I received a call from my ex-husband. I hadn't deleted his contact information because of the ongoing child support. "Sorry to call out of the blue after such a long time," he said, his voice sounding dark and lifeless as if he were a different person. "There's something I'd like to discuss. Can we meet?" Sensing the seriousness in his tone, I agreed to meet him at a cafe near my parents' house after work the following day. When we met, he revealed, "I've been diagnosed with a serious illness. It's already in a bad state. It's ridiculous that I didn't notice anything wrong until it got this far." His weak smile left me at a loss for words. "So I might not be able to provide child support going forward," he continued. "That's why I want to make our son the beneficiary of my life insurance." I was taken aback by his sudden offer but nodded in acknowledgement of his earnest expression. "Leaving a large sum of money to Marissa wouldn't do any good," he muttered. Driven by curiosity, I asked, "What did you see in her? Was it just her looks?" "That was part of it," he admitted. "But she also had moments of diligence. She seemed to understand what men wanted, knew how to reach out where it itched. But now I realized that was just her way of snagging a man." His response made sense to me. I had never thought he would marry solely based on appearances, but from the way he spoke, it seemed Marissa had outplayed him. "Facing death has finally given me the chance to reflect on my life," he said. "The only thing of value I ever did was marrying you and bringing our child into this world." In the quiet cafe, his sniffles were the only sound I could hear. "I did something terrible to you back then. I'm an idiot for not realizing it until now. I'm truly sorry. This is the only way I can make amends." I could feel the sincerity in his words. "All right," I said. "Make Alex the beneficiary." When I nodded in agreement, my husband, oblivious to the onlookers, began to cry uncontrollably. I felt a slight relief, realizing that he did indeed have a heart. Later, we met again to sign and stamp the necessary documents. While I felt a twinge of pity for him, I also thought it was a form of divine retribution that he deserved. Half a year later, he informed me that he was going to be hospitalized. Deciding it might be a final farewell, I took our son to visit him, thinking it might be the last time we would see him. When we arrived, my husband looked significantly more emaciated than before, but he managed to smile upon seeing Alex. "You've grown so much," he said, addressing our son. "Thanks to being taken around by his grandparents." Alex, who was usually friendly, smiled back at his father. "I'm really sorry. Such a cute kid. I was truly an idiot. This is my karma." As my husband wept, scrunching his face, Alex gently patted him, trying to comfort him. It was clear that if my husband had recognized what was truly important sooner, he might have found happiness. Watching this, the hatred I had felt towards him seemed to dissipate. However, as I left the hospital and was descending in the elevator to the first floor, I encountered the last person I wanted to see. "Hey, why are you here?" I asked, seeing Marissa in those ribbon-adorned high heels. The humiliation I felt when I first saw her resurfaced immediately. "I was informed, so I came to see my son for the last time," Marissa said, glaring at me and Alex. "Even though you were dumped, don't ever come back. If you do, I won't let it go." With that, she boarded the elevator we had just exited and went back up. Although her words were infuriating, I understood that my unexpected visit would be uncomfortable for her. After that encounter, I never returned to the hospital and had no intention of seeing them again. However, 3 months later, Marissa made an unexpected visit to my parents' house. "Sorry for the sudden visit," she said. "My husband passed away. I didn't contact you before because I didn't want you at the funeral, but since you came to see him, I thought I should let you know." "Is that so?" "My condolences," I replied, though I had prepared myself for the news. The weight of my former husband's death was heavier than I expected. "From now on, please don't contact me or my son again. I never want to see your face again." "Yes, of course," Marissa said. "Oh, just one moment, please." I went inside and retrieved $200 from a drawer, placing it in a condolence envelope. I handed it to Marissa. "Please use this for flowers." Marissa's face twisted momentarily in a sour expression, but after receiving the envelope, she gave a slight bow and left. I thought my relationship with my ex-husband was completely over. However, a year later, an unexpected call from my former mother-in-law dragged me into an unimaginable situation. It was a day off, and I was home alone, enjoying the peace. The phone rang, interrupting my tranquility. "Hello, is this Linda? Ken's funeral is about to start. Surely you don't plan on skipping it, do you?" I was stunned. "Excuse me. What are you talking about?" "Ken has passed away. Marissa contacted you yesterday, didn't she? I'm on my way to pick you up. Be ready and wait at the entrance." 3 years had passed since my divorce, and I hadn't been in touch with my mother-in-law. This call was unexpected, and to make matters worse, my ex-husband was supposed to have died a year ago. Confused, I quickly changed into morning clothes and prepared to leave. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang incessantly. "Come on, we're going. It's outrageous not to attend the funeral of a husband who treated you well, even if you're divorced." "The funeral? You mean the first anniversary, right?" I asked, trying to make sense of it. My mother-in-law frowned deeply. "The funeral is about to start. Why would it be the first anniversary? What are you talking about?" Our conversation wasn't aligning. A year ago, Marissa, my ex-husband's current wife, had personally informed me of his death. I had even sent a condolence envelope with $200. When I mentioned this, my mother-in-law clicked her tongue in irritation and her frown deepened. "Just get in the car. Where's Alex?" "Alex isn't coming. I don't want him to see Marissa," I replied. Without further comment, my mother-in-law guided me into the passenger seat and we drove straight to the funeral home. It seemed strange to invite an ex-wife who had been separated for years to a funeral. Caught between my mother-in-law's and Marissa's conflicting stories, I was desperate to find out the truth. Upon arrival, the monk had just begun the chanting. The small funeral hall indicated a service limited to close family. My husband's portrait was displayed on the altar. It appeared to be his funeral after all. I couldn't help but feel a mix of absurdity and disbelief. The service proceeded without incident. As we waited for the hearse to depart, Marissa approached me aggressively. "Why are you here? Didn't I tell you never to show your face again? Why are you attending without being invited?" As always, Marissa's way of speaking was infuriating. I was the one who called her. Marissa snapped. "Didn't I tell you I'd contact Linda? What use is your head?" I didn't want her here at the funeral. My mother-in-law sighed deeply, her face darkening with frustration. "You lied about Ken dying a year ago and even accepted condolence money from Linda. Is there another reason you were so insistent on keeping her away?" Marissa's face tense, and I could see her struggling to maintain her composure. "Linda, I invited you today because I thought it was right for you to say your final thank you to Ken, considering how well he treated you. You were taken care of, so it seemed appropriate to express gratitude and see him off." I tilted my head, confused by her words. Despite receiving child support every month, Marissa had always demanded more. Her panic was evident as she sweated profusely, even though the room wasn't hot. "Yes, that's right. Since you received child support every month, you should have paid your respects properly. But now the funeral is over, so you can go home. We'll say our goodbyes with just the family. Please leave," Marissa insisted, trying to push me out with unnatural urgency. As Marissa's actions became more desperate, I began to understand the meaning behind my mother-in-law's frowns and the tension in her demeanor. It seemed she had suspected Marissa's motives all along. I shrugged off Marissa's hand and turned to face my mother-in-law squarely. "What additional child support? I haven't received anything beyond the agreed amount. I haven't been in contact with him for a long time." My mother-in-law's expression turned thunderous. "So you've been deceiving us all along? You complained about Linda's demands being too high, yet I've been sending you $1,000 every month. You've been pocketing all of it." The revelation struck me hard. I had never imagined that Marissa was exploiting me to extort money from my in-laws. Cornered by my mother-in-law and me, Marissa, realizing she could no longer make excuses, lashed out defiantly. "It's not my fault. He earned a lot but never let me spend freely. And it seems he had other women until he fell ill. I'm the one who was deceived." My husband had indeed had a good salary from his job at a large corporation, but even when we were married, he had only given me a fixed monthly allowance. I had never struggled financially, but my ex-husband's infidelity was undeniable. "You could have lived comfortably without your extravagance, couldn't you? Ken said you were just a money pit. Apparently, you barely did any housework and spent your time gallivanting around. Enough, be quiet. It's his fault for not letting me have freedom. It's only natural for your in-laws to support me when their daughter-in-law is struggling," Marissa shot back. At last, Marissa's true feelings surfaced. "His inheritance rightfully belongs to me, his wife now. I can finally have my freedom. So don't invite his ex-wife as you please." The real reason Marissa didn't want me at the funeral was clear now. She wanted to avoid any inheritance going to my son, Ken's legitimate child. The relatives waiting for the hearse were whispering and frowning among themselves. Hearing the commotion, my father-in-law came over and apologized. "I'm sorry you got dragged into this. I'll reach out another day, so it's okay for you to head home now." I thanked him and, turning my back on the arguing Marissa and my mother-in-law, left before the hearse had departed. I felt entangled in a messy situation and hoped this would be the end, but a nagging feeling told me otherwise. That intuition proved correct. About 3 months later, something unimaginable happened. It was a holiday, and we had gone to a large park for a picnic. The park, a vast forest, was bustling with families and couples. Alex, now 3 years old, was full of energy, and my parents and I took turns keeping up with him. While my dad and I were lying on the picnic blanket, my mom, who had taken Alex to the playground, came back looking panicked. "Alex is missing. Hurry up, Alex is gone." Alarmed, we rushed over but couldn't find Alex near the slide where he had been playing. He had slid down once and went back up to slide again, but he never came back down. The slide was crowded with children, and I widened my search, scanning the surroundings. I spotted Alex's yellow hat as he walked along a path beyond the playground. It appeared he was being led by a woman I didn't recognize. Shouting Alex's name, he stopped and looked back. At that moment, the woman holding his hand started to run, lifting him into her arms. Before I could run, my father, who had been jogging, had already sprinted ahead. My heart raced with fear, making it hard to keep up. I called out to him, "Dad, they're heading towards the parking lot." My father increased his speed and shouted for help. "Someone please stop that woman. She's kidnapping a child." The woman reached her car and tried to throw Alex into the passenger seat, but several young dads, responding to my father's cries, managed to grab her just as she was about to get in. My father took the sobbing Alex out of the car and handed him over to me. Relieved, I hugged my son tightly, grateful that he was safe. I collapsed to the ground, clutching Alex tightly. "Don't interfere because of that kid. I don't get any money if he's around. If only he wasn't here. If only he would disappear." The woman was Marissa. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her screaming, spitting, and raging clearly indicated her derangement. Trembling, I could only watch in stunned silence as Marissa was taken away by the police. Later, my father-in-law reached out to apologize and discuss the life insurance policy left by my ex-husband. It turned out my in-laws had been instructed by my husband to handle the situation this way, but they had kept it from Marissa until the inheritance could be settled. Apart from the life insurance, Marissa was to inherit everything else, but it appeared there wasn't much left. The substantial alimony paid during our divorce 3 years ago and the expenses from his illness had depleted most of the estate. There was, however, more than one insurance policy, and Marissa had received a significant sum, at least in the hundreds of thousands. She had been splurging on young hosts and had always been reckless with money, accumulating considerable debt. It seemed she had used the inheritance to pay off some of her debts, though it was unclear if she had managed to settle them all. My father-in-law sighed deeply, his exasperation evident. Marissa couldn't stand knowing how much insurance money was left for Alex. The amount set aside for him was $400,000. Marissa naively thought that if Alex were to pass away, the insurance money would automatically go to her. Items like adhesive tape, rope, and a knife were found in Marissa's car. During her police interrogation, she confessed to planning to kidnap and kill Alex. The thought of her deranged look still sends shivers down my spine. Perhaps our overbearing love for Ken had swung from excessive interference to complete non-interference. "We interfered too much in Ken's life out of love," my father-in-law continued. "Our relationship deteriorated around the time he went to college, so we learned to keep our opinions to ourselves and respect his decisions. We should have been more present for Alex. We should have supported you more. I'm truly sorry." My mother-in-law added, "Alex was named after Ken's childhood friend from a family that respected his decisions, unlike us. That friend is now living his dream as a pilot. I think Ken wanted Alex to have a life similar to his friends." She dabbed her nose with a handkerchief. "Thank you for keeping the name my son suggested for your grandson. There's no doubt that the moment your husband first held our child, he wished for a happy future for him. Just knowing that was more than enough for me. Although I can't forgive what my husband did, I no longer harbor hatred towards him. Looking towards the future, our family has decided to move to my mother's hometown, where we hope to start anew. It seems Marissa will remain behind bars for some time, but I never want to see her again." Despite the unbelievable situation we were dragged into, it brought some clarity. Sunday, I want to tell Alex that his father truly wished for his happiness. Moving forward, our family of 4 intends to live happily, respecting each other's decisions.